Good evening. Are you asleep? Good evening. And welcome, my brothers and sisters, my siblings in birth and death. So with that kind of a welcome, you're wondering what the topic is tonight. Actually, I'll invite you to sit with that for a moment. We are all siblings in birth and death. We're not so different from one another in that we come and we go in this life, and we're in this planet, in this body for a while. So the topic for tonight, I want to share some reflections on one of the mindfulness practices that is appropriate for both beginners and experienced practitioners. You've heard of mindfulness of the body, Kaya-gadasati, mindfulness of mind, Chittanupassati, and the topic for tonight, is Maranasati, mindfulness of death, passing away. We all do it. In 100 years, not a single one of us in this room will be alive. It's an interesting thought, right? Look around actually for a moment. Welcome each other, smile at each other in this form, in the way you are right now, sitting here. In 100 years, none of us will be here. It's a truth, it's an awareness, it's a practice we often like to avoid. Yeah, I'll do mindfulness of the body, I'll do body awareness, I'll do mindfulness of emotions, all of that. But being aware, Maranasati, Marana, Lord of Death, Sati, often translated as mindfulness. Really, awareness is a better translation. Maranasati, mindfulness of death, awareness of death. It's a practice we don't usually practice. And yet, what I like to cover for most of the talk tonight is really the enlivening, the benefits. I have 10 benefits. Every time I teach this practice, I come up with more benefits. So far I have 10. Maybe by the end of tonight it will be 12. We'll see. But the various benefits actually in our humanity, in our waking up, in the way that we live our lives, in the way we die, in so many ways that actually this is such a profound and skillful practice for us to bring into our consciousness instead of avoiding it, which is what we usually do. So the talk is structured, so you know, in the following way. At first, I like to talk about the denial of death, what's called the terror management theory. Psychologists have a great name for it. Catch that? Terror management theory. I think TMT is pretty cool. I'd like to talk a little bit about that, and then about some typical responses that we have as human beings born out of this TMT, terror management theory, and explain that. And then some of the immortality stories that we tell ourselves, which are very prevalent in the culture and in the way that we consider our mortality. And then I like to turn our attention to how mindfulness of death actually is a liberating practice, and the benefits, the amazing benefits that it has, and how normal actually death is. So with that, let me start by talking a little bit more about terror management theory. So what is that? So TMT proposes that there is a basic psychological conflict that results from us knowing that we're going to die. And in a way, us human beings are pretty unique. We're very unique animals. And the author of The Denial of Death, which is a Pulitzer Prize winner for general nonfiction in 1974, Ernest Becker. It's a very famous book. Anyone familiar with Denial of Death? A bunch of people. Yeah, it's thick reading, but it's a good book. He puts it in a succinct way. This is the paradox, he says. Man is out of nature and hopelessly in it. He is dual. He's, by the way, this is written in 1974, and this person is using just he, so maybe I'll use they to make it more general. They are dual, up in the stars and yet housed in a heart-pumping, breath-gasping body that once belonged to a fish and still carries the gill marks to prove it. Human being is literally split in two. One has an awareness of one's own splendid uniqueness in that one sticks out of nature with a towering majesty, and yet one goes back into the ground a few feet in order to blindly and dumbly rot and disappear forever. I think he captures it really well, right? Just doesn't mince words. It is a terrifying dilemma, hence terror management theory. It's a terrifying dilemma to be in and to have to live with. The lower animals are, of course, spared this painful contradiction, as they lack a symbolic identity and the self-consciousness that goes with it. They merely act and move reflexively as they are driven by their instincts. So Ernest Becker actually, his book, The Denial of Death, really started the terror management theory idea in psychology. It was born out of his book. And then psychologists have done a lot of research in that. And the idea is that out of this terror, out of our ego not being able to contemplate its own demise, really, and a sense of terror, a sense of fear arises. And in order to manage this terror, we engage in a lot of cultural beliefs and symbolic systems in order to create a durable form of meaning. So what are some typical responses? So are you with me so far with the terror management theory? Yes. Makes sense? Yep. Okay. Yeah. So what are some typical responses? Ignorance, oblivion, putting our heads in the sand. Oh gosh, is she going to talk about death tonight? Fear, aversion, shopping, drugs. Again, I want to quote Ernest Becker, a couple more paragraphs. Human being literally drives themselves into a blind obliviousness with social games, psychological tricks, personal preoccupations so far removed from the reality of their situation that they are forms of madness, but madness all the same. And here's one more paragraph from him. The modern man is drinking and drugging himself out of awareness, or one spends one's time shopping, which is the same thing. I love that line. He equating shopping with drinking and drugging oneself. But anyway, Amazon, beware. As awareness calls for types of heroic dedication that one's culture no longer provides for one, society contrives to help one forget. And that is true. The society really contrives to make us forget. There's a next thing to want. There's a next iPhone. There's a next this. There's a next gadget. There's this. There's all the preoccupations that the society provides for you in order to, not to even mention Facebook and Twitter and the other distractions that we have, filling every single moment that we have, lest we consider our impermanence in this life and the limited time we have. Also want to talk about a few immortality stories that we tell ourselves, and the credit for these goes to Stephen Cave, the philosopher, from his book Immortality. Anyone familiar with the book Immortality, Stephen Cave? Not so much. This one is newer. So he has 4 stories that we tell ourselves. Let's see if these are familiar to you. So the first immortality story we tell ourselves is the elixir story. and that is there's an elixir of life, the fountain of youth, and this is the most basic form of immortality story. Basically, avoiding death physically by staying young and healthy forever. So, in the past, previous cultures, the ancient Egyptians about 4,000 years ago, Chinese about 2,000 years ago, they considered their culture to be so advanced. The same way that we consider our culture to be pretty advanced, they thought their culture was very advanced, and that the death-defying technology was right around the corner. They were almost there. They could almost feel it. How does that take shape in our present culture? Well, you might have heard of various diets, intermittent fasting, that's supposed to lengthen your life. There's anti-aging investments in Silicon Valley. You might have heard of those. There are many supplements. There's research. There is something called the Neurohacker Collective. There are lots of supplements. I just checked the website today. You can buy these supplements and live long and healthy and, basically extend your life. Familiar? Yes, familiar? Yeah, extend your life. Don't die. This body can just be extended. There's a lot more to say, but for brevity of time, I'm going to move on just to give you a sense of these immortality stories. And as I tell you the stories, see how they resonate for you. Do they resonate? Is this, and not good, not bad, just a sense of, oh yeah, this is true. This is true. Or maybe not. Okay, second immortality story is, he calls it the resurrection story, the resurrection story. And the idea is that, okay, if we're unable to extend our lives indefinitely in this body, well, maybe we can rise after dying and live again. And in the past, there are stories of resurrection in both Christianity as well as Islam and Judaism. And the new resurrection story, or the scientific resurrection story of our zeitgeist, of our time, is as of November of last year, November 30th of last year, Alcor, which is this company, had 1,678 patients in cryopreservation. The whole bodies or brains preserved in liquid nitrogen, awaiting a future when they could be brought back to life. Anyone would like to be frozen, their brains or your bodies, so that you would be brought back to life? Well, apparently 1,678 people have signed up, and the numbers keep going up. So if you're interested, it's called Alcor. Anyway. Okay, so immortality story. So if we're going to die, maybe science will be at a place where we don't really have to die. We can come back and live again. Okay. The third immortality story we tell ourselves is the story of the soul. So if we embrace the idea of the soul, we can give up the body altogether. It's not really needed. Because our true essence becomes not the physical organism, but an immaterial thing. And of course, historically, there are religious beliefs in afterlife in many religions. Plato, as well as the Hindus, believe that the body is an obstacle to immortality, and really the main goal in life is to become pure spirit. The reincarnation of this idea in our modern scientific society is mind uploading, and scientific fields like whole brain emulation. You might have heard about these. And our organizations like Carbon Copies that hope to create accurate computational models of neural tissue at this scale of complex brains, complete brains, and develop neuromorphic hardware to run simulations of your brains on these models. Anyone up for that? Right? But this is the new version of the story of the soul. You get to be rerun. You get to be rerun. And just to say, as a footnote, that actually, as the more the science as it has progressed, we know that the idea of separate immaterial soul is becoming less plausible in that the you, the idea of you, is not just your software, not just the way you think and your neural connections, but it's really dependent on your body, on your physical manifestation, your genetic makeup for each of you individually. Excuse me. Okay, moving on to the last of the fourth immortality story. It's called the legacy story. So this the legacy story give the example of Achilles, where when he was given the choice to go home and live a long and happy life, or stay in Troy, fight and die, but be remembered forever as the greatest hero of all times. What did he choose? Stay in Troy, become known as the greatest hero of all times, the legacy story, the legacy of Achilles. And in the past, of course, historically, many people have inspired by the pursuit of immortality through fame or cultural legacy. And it continues today in our culture, and now we have a new form of it, technology giving each and every one of us the means to instant fame by creating our own statues, by tweets and through Instagram posts, and capturing and preserving the memories of our lives. So the idea of legacy. But many consider this route to immortality a little too indirect. And there's this quote from Woody Allen where he says, I don't want to live on in the hearts of my countrymen. I want to live on in my apartment. So the alternative to the mindful to these stories that we tell ourselves, these immortality stories that we tell ourselves, is actually pivot and become aware, mindfulness of our impermanence, of the fact that we die. Awareness and acceptance of the truth of death. Carlos Castaneda says, death is the only wise advisor we have. And I love that quote. It's a practice actually I've done a lot, which is imagining that death is this wise advisor on my shoulder. I have limited time. This is wise. Do I want to do this? And death is as normal as birth, as I welcomed all of you, my siblings, in birth and death. We've all been born. We all die. There's nothing unnatural about it. Nothing unnatural about coming and going. It's a part of our humanity. And I'd like to invite you, actually, at this point, if you would reflect on the people who have been near and dear to you and who have passed on. Maybe grandparents, maybe parents, relatives, loved ones, friends. Maybe cultural figures, icons. Teachers. So by bringing them close in this room right now with us, inviting a sense of intimacy, and it's not so foreign, it's part of our lives. Many people whom we have loved and cared about have gone through this threshold. And everyone does it successfully, and so will we. So while fear of death seems to be natural, given what we were just discussing with terror management theory. It's not rational, because it's not rational, as it is part of life. Many of you might have heard the story of Kisa Gotami in the time of the Buddha. She was the wife of a wealthy man, and the story is that her only child, she loses her only child, and she is absolutely devastated. She's desperate to the point that many thought that she has lost her mind due to grief. And someone tells her to go to the Buddha, and the Buddha is able to help her. So she goes to the Buddha and begs the Buddha to bring the dead child back to life. And the Buddha says, I will do that only if you go and bring me a mustard seed. And that time in India, mustard seed was very, very common. Every household had mustard seed. So if you go and bring me a mustard seed from a household that has not seen death, has not experienced death. So she goes to the village, knocks on the door. Do you have a mustard seed? Oh, of course we do. Oh, has there been a death in your household? Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Uncle, brother, child. Sorry. Next door. Knock, knock, knock. Do you have a mustard seed? Oh, yes. Wait, death, yes. So she continues that over and over and over, every door of the village, until it dawns on her. She gets it, sense of insight, that every household, everyone is visited by death. So she returns to the Buddha and ordains, and she becomes awakened. So we are nature. This body is nature. It has come out of nature. It will go back into nature. Just as leaves fall, this body will, as Ernest Becker put, will rot in the earth. We are nature. And not to take the body personally. And one of the practices in Buddhism that we do in order to actually see the nature aspect of this body is called corpse contemplation, and it's actually it's laid out very clearly in the Satipatthana Sutta, in the Four Foundations of Mindfulness Sutta, teaching of the Buddha, in the first foundation on the body, and one is to contemplate the body going through different stages, and if the idea of it makes you queasy, there are other ways to do this contemplation. Many of the monks and many people in Asia have done this practice, going to the charnel grounds and contemplating. I remember actually a few years ago, as part of there is a training that Gil leads every year, chaplaincy program, and as part of that program, the trainees have the privilege, because it really is a privilege, to go into an anatomy lab where bodies have been donated in one of the colleges for students to learn, for autopsy, to see the bodies, and this group of trainees for the chaplaincy program gets the privilege to actually go and visit the bodies, the corpses, which have been preserved, and dissection is happening on them. And once I was able to join the group, and it was quite a profound experience to see that this body is not so body. This body is alive, and that body is no longer alive. And this body will be just like that body at some point. Of course, not with formaldehyde, likely, but not so different. Not so different. not so different. And also to point out that there are differences, there are different perspectives in the Western and Eastern perspectives to reactions to death. I'd like to read a little excerpt from this article that showed up in Tricycle magazine in winter of 2014, and it's called The Sea of Sorrow. And here's the little description of it. On the eve of the 10th anniversary of the Indian Ocean tsunami, a psychologist who volunteered to help survivors in Thailand recalls her staggering confrontation with death and considers how a Buddhist country coped with the truth of impermanence. And I think the article was written by Rona Kabatsnik. So here's a couple of paragraphs from it. There were shots of bikini-clad corpses on beaches and stunned survivors frantically searching among them for loved ones. Video clips showed demolished homes and hotels, capsized fishing boats, crushed cars, and acres of debris. Seawater still gushed from broken storefront windows and down the streets and alleys. The Indian Ocean tsunami turned out to be one of the most devastating natural disasters in recorded history, leaving an estimated 227,000 dead and 125,000 injured, 45,000 missing, and 1.69 million displaced. In the idyllic tropical setting, the day after Christmas, who could have imagined that this will be the day that I die? Consider that. This will be the day that I die. The Thai way of grieving, from what I could see, was composed, reflecting what is known as Jai Yen, a cool heart. Mourner appeared to see death as a part of life, not as an injustice or a dreadful mistake, even when it was unexpected or swift. Expressing emotions wasn't an issue for Westerners who had Jai Ron, a hot heart. Many felt angry and betrayed by the tsunami and by the experts who didn't detect it in time to transmit warnings. They should have known how irresponsible, they declared. Parents bitterly blamed themselves for not being able to protect their children from death. I am a bad parent. It's my fault, they confessed, as if they were personally responsible for the natural disaster. This difference between the two perspectives demonstrates one of the Buddha's key teachings. Our minds are habituated to relate to suffering by resisting it through blame, bitterness, anger, resentment. That resistance is what the Buddha called the second arrow, which follows the first arrow, the direct experience of pain. So much additional suffering comes from believing that things shouldn't be this way, when in fact, they are that way. Although tragedy and loss feel personal, they are not. Suffering and loss are built into the human condition. I spoke with one local woman in her late 20s who stood beside 3 stacked caskets containing her young son, daughter, and husband. Pentamada, Pentamachat, she whispered in response to my condolences. This is natural. This is nature. This is natural. This is nature. So I invite us to consider our reactions to death, considering it as an injustice, somebody's fault, with blame, bitterness, anger, resentment, or that it's natural and it's nature. So I'd like to turn our attention in the time that is left. I'd like to talk about the benefits of mindfulness of death practice. Either whether you're a beginner or an experienced practitioner, why the heck would you want to do this anyway? Especially if it sounds morbid to you. Why do you want to do this? The first and foremost reason to do it is it aligns our life with our values. Because often what we actually have, it's called misalignment problem. So what is the misalignment problem? Misalignment problem is that most of us want to spend our time in a particular way. We have particular values, but we actually end up spending our time in a different way. So there was this study, the Nobel Prize winner Daniel Kahneman surveyed a group of women and asked them how they, out of their voluntary activities, what did they enjoy doing? So they reported that they got more satisfaction from prayer, worship, and meditation from watching television. Okay, they said they had a choice, free time. They got more out of prayer, worship, meditation than watching television, and yet, on average, they spent average of 5 times more watching television than engaging in any of those other activities. Yes? Does it ring a bell for anyone? And in fact, there's another study that reports that maybe this study was even underreported, because there's another study that asked people, and they said they valued socializing and communication with others more, but they actually spent, and then they spent 20 times longer on TV than religious and spiritual activities. Not 5, but 20. Choose your pick, wherever you are on the spectrum. Okay, so the misalignment problem is that when we know these are what we value, what we want to do, what we get satisfaction out of, spending time with friends, communicating, meditating, whatever it might be, but we end up spending our time in a different way. And the solution is not to come up with resolutions. New Year is coming up. Yes, time for new resolutions. How successful have they been? Good luck. So resolutions are a stick approach. Don't do this. Don't, right? It's a stick approach. Whereas what we want is a carrot approach. And what is a carrot approach in this way? The carrot approach is to bring the scarcity of time to our consciousness. And how do you bring the scarcity of time to your consciousness? Anyone? Mindfulness of death. There you go. You realize your time is precious. You don't live forever. In fact, Sam Harris has a wonderful quote. I'll just share a part of it. He says, if you're like most people, you'll spend most of your time tacitly presuming you'll live forever, like watching a bad movie for the 4th time or bickering with your spouse. These things only make sense in light of eternity. So what do you do that really only makes sense in light of eternity? It really makes no sense in light of the limited time that you have in this body and in this life. So, to recap, the first and foremost, I would say, is aligning our life with our values, bringing up samvega, spiritual urgency, knowing that the time is really limited. So in that way, bringing the scarcity of our time into our consciousness. I'm not going to live forever. Do I really want to watch this bad rerun for the 4th time or bicker with my spouse? The second benefit is we live without fear of death for our own sake. And we don't end up engaging in typical escape activities. It frees up so much psychic energy, and the various stories that we tell ourselves, immortality stories, no need. There can be so much more peace and space in life. I had a retreatant on a death contemplation retreat. I teach a retreat at Spirit Rock every year, 7 days, and this practitioner, who at times during the retreat was having a lot of challenges with mindfulness of death, and feeling really challenged. And remember, on the last day, he stopped me and he said thank you, and he said, how do you put a value on coming in with a mortal fear of death and leaving with peace? How do you put a value on that? To live your life without a fear of death. That burden lifted, gone. Just living with ease and freedom, not this terror that you need to manage all the time by doing things, drugging yourself, shopping, not thinking about it. The third gift of mindfulness of death is to live without fear of death for the sake of our loved ones. 2 was for our sake. This one is for the sake of our loved ones. Because if we are not afraid of death, then it's a huge gift we can give our loved ones. My mom passed away about 1.5 years, almost 2 years ago, and she was not afraid of dying. And that was one of the biggest gifts she gave me. Just a sense of peace and ease. She held my hand through it. She knew what was going on. Just held my hand through it. And similarly, with me having done death contemplation for such a long time, I was able to hold her hand through it. So my peace with my death allowed me to be available for her, so for sake of our loved ones, so that we can be present for those who are passing and not clingy to them and not make their process even more difficult, but actually make it more easeful. It can create so much intimacy and ease. Fourth, death contemplation practices, mindfulness of death, can sharpen our lived experience. Many of you might have already experienced when your mind is really still and present, the experience of your life becomes sharper, tastes become more tastier, colors become more intense. Just the experience of this moment becomes brighter. It feels like it expands. There is the classical mindfulness of death experience, actually, practice, which is taught in the Maranasati Sutta, which is briefly is the contemplation of this could be my last breath. This right here, this could be my last breath. This in-breath could be my last in-breath. This out-breath, right here, right now. Not that I'm going to die in 10 years. Oh, I have time. No, right here. This could be my last out-breath. There may be no more. And this practice, taken on as a formal practice on the cushion, the same way that you do mindfulness of the body or metta, this death contemplation practice on the cushion can really intensify just experience, the sharpening our lived experience right here, right now. Right here, right now. There may not be so much time. Who knows? Maybe there's an asteroid and somehow NASA has missed it. It has happened before. Maybe an asteroid is coming and this could be the last moment. Who knows? We can awaken, number 5, we can awaken in life through non-clinging. Awaken in this life. And I'm going to speed up through the rest because we have 4 more minutes left and many more. But so awakening, so the other benefits is sense of letting go, cultivating and letting go in this life. So awakening, the practice of mindfulness of death can be an awakening practice, liberating practice. And a couple of other benefits, I'll put them in one, is actually in the process of dying, that So the other ones I mentioned as a gift to ourselves and loved one is how we live our lives. But in the moment of death can actually be a gift to ourselves to actually enjoy the process. It's a mystery. We don't know what's going to happen. If we're not scared, maybe we can actually be relaxed and be open for the process. Who knows? Might actually be very, very interesting. And are also teaching Buddhist teachings about awakening at the moment of death, and their teachings to Anathapindika, and on his deathbed, given by Sariputta, to let go systematically, let go, let go, let go, let go. And the moment of death can actually be a meaningful moment of awakening, liberation, nibbana. So the practice of letting go can actually be awakening in life or awakening in death. And 9 and 10, gratitude and appreciation can arise for this precious human life. And also metta and compassion can arise. In fact, in the Dhammapada, you've likely heard, hatred never ends through hatred. By non-hate alone does it end. This is an ancient truth. The line after this is, many do not realize that we here must die. For those who realize this, quarrels end. So a sense of perspective, compassion, love. Why are we quarreling? We're all dying. Why are we quarreling? And I like to end with this sense of gratitude and appreciation arising for this precious human life by a couple of quotes, one from Steve Cave and another one from Ajahn Chah. So if we're not fearing death and we don't think it's an injustice, and we feel more grateful having had the chance to live altogether instead of having this sense of entitlement. Like, wow, I was conscious, I'm alive, wow. So Stephen Cave says, in fact, if you think how unlikely it is that the book of your life should have ever come to be written, all the coincidences from the beginning of life that brought you here, the proper attitude is not fear that it might come to an end, but gratitude that it should have been written at all. So there is no room to complain how short life is. The only thing that matters is that you try to make it a good story. And here's a last quote from Ajahn Chah. You see this goblet? Asks Ajahn Chah, the Thai meditation master. For me, this glass is already broken. I enjoy it. I drink out of it. It holds my water admirably. Sometimes, even reflecting the sun in beautiful patterns, if I should tap it, it has a lovely ring to it. But when I put this glass on the shelf and the wind knocks it over or my elbow brushes it off the table and it falls to the ground and shatters, I say, of course. When I understand that the glass is already broken, every moment with it is precious. So with that, I appreciate your attention, your kind attention. My sisters and brothers, siblings in birth and death, may you be well and may you make it a good story. Thank you.